Hi, I'm Graham. Hey, welcome to our video on how to do effective trigger point therapy. Now, to keep this simple, I've done this video in two parts. Now, the first part, which is this one, is the background info. That includes what trigger points are, why your typical courses such as needles or lasers only give temporary relief, and how we put together a way for you to eliminate them properly. Now, the second part I've linked above, I'll go over our effective solution. Now, if you're not familiar with myofascial trigger points, or trigger points for short, they're an important cause of most musculoskeletal pain syndromes such as back, neck and shoulder pain. Plus, they have a host of other detrimental effects including muscle tightness, restricted movement, fatigue, and making you more likely to be injured. Now, there are a lot of treatments for trigger points, but as mentioned, most courses of trigger point therapy just temporarily stop them hurting, which means they're still there, which means they eventually start hurting again. Now, let's start by looking at what trigger points are. Now, they're those tender lumps in your muscles that massage therapists find that shoot pain when they press on them. Now, the lump is actually part of the muscle that is spasmed or cramped, and because the spasm shortens the muscle, that part of the muscle becomes tight. Now, as shown in this diagram, they start small and gradually grow over the years or decades. Now, at first you only know they're there if a therapist presses on them. But as they grow, the muscle will gradually tighten, causing things like restricted movement, altering your posture and causing fatigue. Now, as this diagram shows, eventually something may aggravate the trigger point and then it'll start shooting pain. Now, let's look at why courses of therapies such as needles, lasers or manual therapies only temporarily relieve the pain. Now, what actually happens is, as shown by the blue arrow in this diagram, the trigger points just go back the way they were before they were aggravated. Now you'll see in the diagram the technical term for this is deactivation, and as we'll see, this term is used very deceptively to create the illusion that these treatments are doing more. Now, let's look at how this deception works. Now, as I discussed in the article linked in the description, clinical trials have absolutely shown that typical courses of trigger point therapy don't eliminate the trigger points. Now, the best example is where arguably the best trigger point therapists in the world threw everything but the kitchen sink at them for 12 weeks. And as this chart from their report shows, after all this treatment, most were still there. Now, when scientists do clinical trials, a very important part of the process is to research all the relevant studies that have been done before. So, everyone doing a trial on needles, lasers, manual therapies or whatever knows that their course of therapies have got a snowball's chance in hell of eliminating the trigger points. So what do? Now, instead of eliminating trigger points, they make the goal of their treatment deactivation, which, as you've seen, is just a fancy word that means stop hurting. Now, then they very conveniently don't check whether the trigger points are still there afterwards and just measure symptoms. Now, by doing this, they're able to write up their trials as a success. Now, from my research, I found over 30 trials like this. Now, each one claims that their treatments successfully treat trigger points, where the reality is that all any of them ever proved was that their expensive courses of therapy give temporary pain relief. Now, what happens then is the people who sell things like needles and lasers use these deceptive trials to sell their therapies to professionals. Then the professionals provide these therapies thinking they're doing something more worthwhile. So, how do we do better than what amounts to a very expensive aspirin? Now, the clinical trials I've mentioned are practically useless, so what we need to do is look at what we do know about trigger points. Now, for a start, scientists have worked out that a trigger point is actually a chain reaction as shown in this diagram called a positive feedback loop. Now, the spasm causes tightness, which restricts blood flow, which causes a build-up of waste products, which causes more spasm, and the whole thing keeps going round and round in circles. Now, knowing that, we know that therapies work by targeting one or more parts of this loop. Now, for example, massage helps relax muscles, stimulate blood flow, and pumps away nutrients. Now, in the second part video, I'll show you a therapy you can easily do yourself that targets all four things. Now, the second thing this feedback loop tells us that unless you eliminate the trigger points completely, they're just going to keep going round and round and eventually build up again. Now, to help with this, we call upon the small amount of studies that have actually checked whether they're gone. Now, finally, we now understand what causes trigger points to develop. Now, if we can eliminate or reduce those things, that'll help stop them redeveloping. Anyway, thanks for watching so far. Now, I'll link to part 2 where I go over the solution.